Good afternoon. I will try and speak slowly since I'm from Scotland and you may not be able to understand my accent. They didn't give me a roving mic because in Scotland I would probably be singing at a karaoke, so I have a fixed mic. Anyway, this is a very important session on policy, and it really is about putting policy into practice, or being very cynical, rhetoric into reality. There have been many reports in the UK identifying the inefficiencies of the construction industry. The earliest one I found was by Alfred Bossum in 1934. Its title was Reaching for the Skies. And he identified absolutely the same things then as today: inefficiency, ineffectiveness, clients not happy, buildings not delivered on time, on cost and on quality. Since that time in the UK, I have counted 74 reports since that time. Okay, that's the truth. I could build a house with the reports. But all the reports have said the same thing. So the reports are saying one thing, but our actions seem to be the opposite direction. So there's something fundamentally wrong with the way our industry is structured. So there has to be a challenge and change. There has to be a change in the capability and the capacity of the industry. It's undercapitalised. It's risk-averse. It's confrontational. All these things have to change and become more of a collaborative way of working. And I think BIM offers that opportunity. So through the policies that you'll hear from the speakers, they will explain what is happening in France and in Germany and in Europe. I think it's almost, let's say, last chance saloon for Europe. But if we don't move up the knowledge chain and move into the high end of knowledge, then what you watched earlier today from the very interesting presentation about how China and the Chinese may manufacture buildings in the Far East, stick them in ships and ship them over to Europe, that will be a reality unless we can shift the way we design, the way we construct and the way we behave in the industry. So without further ado, I'll just introduce the three speakers. I'm not going to say too much about them. They can say something about themselves as time is of the essence. Sohail is from France, so we'll hear about the French way of challenging the way they work. And in France in particular, something like, I think they have a massive challenge of 500,000 houses per annum or more to be built. And in the UK, if I take UK, it's 250,000 houses per annum. So if I've been here 3 hours this morning, that's over 1,000 housing units have had to be completed this morning. That is a challenge the industry faces, and that's just in housing, never mind other parts of the construction industry. And Ilka from Germany has a very interesting approach in terms of, personally I like the German approach. It's more bottom-up. It's more about mapping processes and looking for that step change. And lastly, Adam will bring in the European perspective and the challenges we face together. So Sohail, would you like to come up first, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Hello, everybody. First of all, very big thanks to the organizers for inviting me here. It's a very nice place to be here in Barcelona. I'm Sohail Soubra from CSTB, and I'll be presenting to you the work we've been doing recently in what we call the Digital Transition Plan. And I'm acting as the scientific advisor for this plan, advised by the government. First of all, let me check up. Okay, so let me give you some information about the building sector in France. This sector has fundamentally and gradually changed these last 2 decades by various drivers. We started by talking about energy efficient buildings, and then green buildings, and then sustainable buildings, and then sustainable and cities and territories. And now we're talking about big data, open data, crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, and all that stuff. So what's happening is, in fact, the fact that the stakeholders are now convinced of the value of information coming from various sources and how they can use this information to better design, construct, and exploit. So this is the major shift that is going on. Some figures about this building construction sector in France. There are something like 30 million housing units that represent, on an average, 60 square meter per unit, approximately. There are approximately 300,000 new units constructed every year. But the fact is that we need 500,000. So there's a big problem there. And the overall budget is around 125 billion euros per year, roughly divided like this: 54 billion euros for new projects and 70 for existing ones. This roughly represents 5% of GDP and around 1 million employees. So another important figure is the following. The cost of disorder or damage, I don't know what's the right English word for it, is between 15 and 20 billion euros per year, which is just huge. And another thing, I mean, I didn't write it because I probably cannot write it very clearly, but what we hear now is that the quality of some of the constructions nowadays is less than what used to happen in the 70s. So there's a big problem there. And also the amount of what we call design changes or supplementary agreements or contract changes. I don't know exactly what's the right term. In French, it's avenant. This is a contract that you would add on top of your initial contract. Is also very important. It's up to 40% of the budget. So this raises a lot of questions regarding the efficiency of the procurement process and also the transparency of this process. Okay. In order to tackle all these issues, the Ministry of Housing, at the moment it was Sylvia Pinel, now it's changed. So in December 2014, Sylvia Pinel launched what she called the Digital Transition Plan for the construction sector. So it's a 3 years project with a budget of 20 million euros. And then Sylvia Pinel nominated Bertrand Delcambre, head of CSTB, as the president of the steering committee of this plan. Okay, so what the plan priorities are basically the following. I don't have time to go much into details, but three major ones. First of all, convincing and inspiring all stakeholders and especially owners to do this transition. The second one is to respond to stakeholders' needs for equipment, support, training, and especially to support small businesses and in order to avoid a digital divide between the big ones and that have the means to do that and the small ones. And finally, to develop a trusted digital ecosystem, including standardization work, software development, and so on and so forth. So then this plan has been organized in the following way. We have a steering committee. I'm saying that to our French and Spanish colleagues who might, start to think about the way to organize things. So there's a steering committee that is composed of government representatives and professionals. And then this steering committee declines strategic axes. And then this steering committee is supported by a technical committee that takes into account this strategic axis and transform it into technical, legal, and financial responses. And this technical committee is led by a technical secretariat managed by CSTB, and the technical committee is also launching specific work groups on specific items. So, again, I don't have time to go much into details of each of these developments, but let me just pick up one major issue that probably represents some kind of specificity of the French plan. This one relates to the importance given to data dictionaries and object libraries. Indeed, we consider that it is very important to be able to include in BIM very detailed information about the specific objects and components that are really used in the project. This is a major issue. And to do so means that we need to have information about product properties. These product properties are then used within objects and building components, and these building components are then stored into libraries. So these three dimensions are very, very important. And this is exactly what we are doing nowadays. So we are in the process of, one, collecting these properties, and then using what are the mechanisms to use these properties, and then to update these properties. And basically what we are doing is we are putting in place work groups with specialists for each sector in order to define, for instance, people working on thermal, people working on acoustics, people working on fire safety, people working on structures, and so on and so forth. And these guys are getting together and defining these properties that then will be used for the components. Another important aspect is the link between these object libraries and components and LODs, levels of developments. We consider that there's in the first LODs, it is important to be able to support generic objects. That is, for instance, designer can say, this is a window, this is a door. I don't know exactly what kind of component it will be, but for the moment it is a generic object. And then at some level, we consider that it's probably around LOD 3, there's a flip-flop mechanism that allows to replace generic objects with industrial components. And this flip-flop mechanism is very important because it allows to have some kind of mapping between the performances that has been anticipated and calculated during the design and the actual characteristics of the industrial components that are used, and make sure that there's a fit there between what you're expecting and what is really being used. As I said, there are a lot of work also done on the standardization committees. So we have three layers on the national level. The standardization committee in France is called AFNOR. There's a lot of work going there around what we call PPBIM, product properties for BIM. And then, as you know, there's the work undertaken within the TC 442 of CEN, also very important. And also a lot of work done on the ISO level. So we have ISO TC 59, SC 13, but also TC 201-11 about information, geographical information, and also TC 184, SC4. And all these, it is very important to see also that we are witnessing something very important here. The fact is the awareness of stakeholders about the importance of BIM is happening exactly in the same time when the standardization committees are working. So this is basically new because usually there's a gap between these two aspects. And it's a great opportunity to have these two issues happening in the same time. So I'm checking the watch and I see that I have only the time to conclude. So what we consider future trends are the following. We absolutely need to go beyond the let's say, yesterday's story about BIM to tomorrow's vision. And it's about BIM, but it's also about a lot of other things that are happening on the Silicon world, and it's about also coupling information coming from various sources about big data, open data, as I said. We need to acknowledge the fact that information has value, and this information will be coming from various sources. We do not want to put it all in one place. We have to link these data between themselves in order to be able to exploit it in the best possible way. We need to go towards a construction app store, allowing a seamless integration between two different things. We have this process of designing, constructing, maintaining, and exploiting. This is one process, but also we have in a vertical one all the link with the supply chain. And the interaction between the two is very important, and this is a lot of work that has been done. To conclude, we really, I mean, the experience in France shows that governments have a role to play. Obviously, I mean, a bottom-up approach is also very interesting, but a governmental strategy allows to give consistency to a lot of work, and this is very important, even if they don't put a lot of money on the table. But the fact that government is implicated and gives some kind of orientation to these strategies is, at least in the French experience, very positive. And the government also has a role to play in order to implement measures that are necessary to help small stakeholders, SMEs, small businesses, in order to avoid this digital divide. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Ilka May from Germany. It's been a long day already, quite a lot to take in. Can you take a bit more? I hope so. Okay, so I'm going to introduce the German roadmap to you, and I called it the bottom-up approach. And we've heard this morning a lot about technology and standards, and so I'm going to take a slightly different road, and I'm going to take you on that journey now. Let's start off with Industry 4.0. So Germany has a very strong economy, luckily, and we have a very strong manufacturing economy, and we have Industry 4.0. And that is supported by two of our ministries, federal ministries, for economics and innovation and research. And we looked at Industry 4.0, so that's all about the digitalization of the manufacturing industry. So the factory of the future, logistics, Internet of Things, yada-da-da-da, all the same things. And we came up with, for the construction sector, with Planen and Bauen 4.0. It means design and construct. Again, 4.0. So why 4.0? Is this a random number? What does the 4.0 stand for? It's the fourth industrial revolution. And we heard in Dominic's presentation this morning, he used the word disruptive a couple of times. So what is the nature of a revolution? It's something that comes fast, that's unexpected, and it introduces change. And from what I heard, especially from this morning from Dominic, it really made me think, and I'm overwhelmed when I hear all that. And I see, wow, fantastic things. There must be some really clever people out there doing really clever things. Who are they? Because when I talk to people, then I hear a slightly different story. And other people also seem to feel overwhelmed, and especially they don't know where to start. And I think this is where the governments, as Sohail just rightly said, governments have a responsibility, and other organizations as well, to take the people along on this journey. Because when we look at change, change is not easily introduced. Because if you ask who wants change, yeah, a lot of people put their hands up. But if you ask people who wants to change, they look the other way and they avoid eye contact. As humans, we don't like to change how we work. So how do you implement, how do you achieve change for an organization, and you all work in some sort of organization, for a nation or maybe even a region like Europe? So we looked at change management. And there's a very simple theory that I would like to share with you because I find it really helpful. And the theory means, and it says, if you have an incentive, if you have a vision, a good action plan, if you have skills and resources, you have a chance to achieve change. But what happens if the incentive, if the trigger or the business case is weak or is missing, then normally people are not willing to change. And if they don't understand the vision where this is all going, they are confused. If you don't have a good action plan, then it's a lot of waste, duplication. Again, you don't know where to start and what to do next, and you don't know how to prioritize. If you're lacking the skills, people normally get anxious. And if you're lacking resources, people get really frustrated because they've understood it all and they're burning to do something, but they don't have the time, the money, the team, the other people, the skills, and they get really frustrated. So I did encounter a lot of these negative emotion in the red boxes over the last year when we started and ran the German initiative. You've seen similar trends before. Again, this morning, this was from Sergio for Spain, and we have very similar figures in Germany. This is the decline in productivity, and there's a global decline in productivity in the construction sector as well, and that is alarming. And when we look at the degree of digitalization and we compare different sectors, we see that construction industry comes up at the very bottom, so at the very low degree of digitalization. Is there a relation? We don't know. We need to find out. Germany. Who's not heard of the Berlin airport fiasco? So, spectacular failure. If there's anything good in that story, and it's not the only one, unfortunately, it has triggered actions from politics, at very high level, from government. So one of the actions was the government, the Ministry for Transport and Digital Infrastructure, introduced a committee to review the reasons and, even more importantly, the action plan. How do we get back on track so that we deliver major projects to time, budget, and quality again in Germany? The committee came back with a 10-point action plan, and one of the actions was to make better use of digital technologies and methods such as BIM. But when you look at the other 9 actions, you will find a lot of BIM in there as well. Build digitally first, do better planning before you start construction. So a lot of things that come naturally with this method are also embedded in the other 9 actions. What happened then, that's quite spectacular, I think, and that's why we call it the bottom-up approach. We then wanted to copy the UK approach by introducing a government task force. Someone has to get on and do it and coordinate, implement the action plan, provide the skills and the resources and all the rest of it. And that failed. We couldn't find a financial or funding mechanism from the government to provide money to a group of people to go off and do it. Wasn't possible. Don't know why it worked in the UK. You have to explain that to me one day. Didn't work in Germany. But what happened then, and I think that's really interesting, is these 14 associations and chambers in Germany, they all came together and they declared a common and joint will, and also they put money on the table. And these are the Association for German Architects, Engineers, Consulting Engineers, the contractors, the software industry, real estate, so covering the entire supply chain of construction. And that's pretty unique, I think, because that is really now bringing the people together and all the different groups and disciplines involved. So one of the activities, the main activity in the last year of this, it's a limited company, Planbauen, was to come up with the German roadmap for introducing BIM in Germany. Now let's explain one of the problems that I encountered again. So I overheard a lot of conversations, so people were talking about BIM. And I thought, well, one person is talking about apples and the other one is talking about bananas, but they don't even realize they were talking about different things. So let's use that picture here to explain what I mean. You don't need to be an expert to see this chappy here is a dog. Yeah? Do we all agree? It doesn't matter how they look like. Yeah? It doesn't matter whether they're tall or small, whether they have a long coat or curly coat or flat. Doesn't really matter, because even when we were kids, we learned to interpret certain characteristics, Sam, so that we don't need to be experts in the field. We can still say, yeah, they're all dogs. That's fine, because someone defined what they are. Let's try and use the same logic on this picture here. Is this a BIM project? I'm asking you. What can we see? We see a virtual building model, three-dimensional. We see two people working on it somehow, and we see there are some windows with some attributes or something. But still, even seeing that, knowing that, I don't know whether that is a BIM project or not. There's lots of things we can do on projects, and we are already doing that everywhere. And that's really fascinating. So there are things we can do in concept design, during design and documentation, coordination, clash detection, clash avoidance, 4D, 5D, taking data on site and taking data into operations. And it's all brilliant stuff. Doesn't answer my question. Is that a BIM project or not? And that is one of the things that this roadmap now is trying to answer. It's trying to define what we mean when we talk about BIM in Germany now. And we probably get rid of the term BIM. We now call it performance or target level 1. And the aim of this roadmap is really to provide clarity on terms and provide a certain definition of what we mean to a certain level of detail. It talks about timing because it provides an implementation time frame. It tries to achieve consistency across the market in order to grow capacity and capability and scalability. The principles are pretty simple. In theory, everything we want to do in 5 years' time, we could do today with technology we have today and contracts and everything else we have today. We are very much aligned and determined to stay aligned with international standards and examples. We are still considering, we have to consider the highly fragmented market situation in Germany with a high proportion of small and medium enterprises. And we want to have, as I said, consistent, appropriate, and understandable client requirements in the procurement process. This is our version of the picture you saw earlier, the reference process. But again, it is still the same. I don't need to explain the details. But I think important here is at the center, it's the ISO standard for managing information on construction projects. This is how, in our roadmap, the first target level is defined. And again, you saw some of that before because we're also using the 5 categories of data, technology, policy, processes, and people to define what we want to see on projects in the future. That's our implementation plan. That's the time frame. So from now on, we are in the mobilization period until 2017. We'll then go into an extended pilot phase where we will see lots of pilot projects then coming up. And then from 2020 on, the first performance level is mandated on infrastructure projects, on new infrastructure projects. Yeah, that's the German roadmap. And happy to take questions after the session. Thank you.
Well, buen dia, hola. Great to see you, everybody. It's such a tremendous sight to see so many people coming together from around Europe. We're at an important moment here in Europe. We've got so much activity going on, as we've seen, in France, here in Spain, of course, and in Germany. There's lots of action which I'd like to talk to you about now. I know what you're thinking. This is a British guy talking about European collaboration. What's going on? Well, I'm going to give you a vision of what we see as a really fantastic and exciting opportunity that we have in front of us to transition the industry for the better over the long term to a world-class digital construction sector. So bear with me for a few more minutes and we will go through what that project looks like. It's great also to be with my colleagues from the steering committee of the EU BIM task group with Ilka and Sohail. And also, with Jorge, Tarico, and Elena in Rome, I think, at the moment. Okay. So, I'll set out what our vision is. First of all, I'll begin with what the ideas are behind our project to create collaboration around Europe why we're doing it, what public procurers are doing, coming together, why do they care about BIM. I think we've heard quite a bit about that already, but I think what we probably haven't talked about is what is the value proposition for collaboration? We talk about the value proposition for digital, for BIM, for working more collaboratively within our projects, but what is the idea behind alignment and convergence that we're proposing to do under the task group? So I'll touch on that as well. And I'll conclude with the ideas about how this helps to create growth opportunities in the international market as well. So without further ado, we heard from Senora Boras this morning, about some of the drivers that she was seeing in terms of why the government is interested here in Catalonia and more broadly in Spain to drive on the BIM agenda. And they resonate not only across our countries, but also across Europe and across the world. These are not unique drivers. We have real pressure on public spending. That's not a temporary thing. This is now a real, the new world order, that we have to be more efficient with how we spend public money. Taxpayers are becoming more demanding about how that money is spent on infrastructure. Talking of infrastructure, we can't stop building. We've got to build for the future. We have to create new roads, new railway networks, social housing. We were just hearing from a moment ago. So these things are not transient. They are permanent factors, permanent drivers for governments as well. This one's a little bit more fluid in terms of what it is, what it looks like around the world. But I think what we see, whether it's in terms of use of raw materials, whether it's in terms of use of carbon and reducing our carbon, or whether it's just purely energy that we're talking about, around the world there are increasing pressures on the world's natural resources, and they need to be used more effectively. Again, we've heard it all this morning, that we need to stimulate growth. That's the role, or one of the roles of governments around the world. I'm going to whiz through some of this. I can see the counter going at a scary rate, so I'm going to go through some of these slides fairly quickly. This is just a vision, a picture of what the construction industry looks like in Europe. So it's a very important sector. It's a large sector. It employs nearly 15 million people. If you just think about that for a minute, that's an important sector that we should all be proud of, and one that we want to improve and to continue to improve the reputation of. It's a fragmented industry. So this is where I think we come back to the points that we've just been discussing from the role of government and public policy more generally, is that governments have a role to play here, to combine and align and give direction, as Sohail was just saying, to industry. 35%, wow, that's a big number. That's the amount of waste that we see traditionally. And again, this is not a UK number, it's around the world we see this. Between 30 to 35% of a project, of the construction sector, if you take it at that level, is not going into built assets in the ground. It's just wasted through the things that we know about, misunderstandings that occur between us, miscommunication, rework, reproducing information. We've all seen this, I'm sure. This is one of the value propositions of BIM, isn't it? This is the idea that with BIM, we can take that open data and we can share it across the project, across the stakeholders, to remove that recreation, that misunderstandings that occur. And the money just symbolizes that someone's paying for that. And this is where I come to government's role, is that ultimately, if it's for public projects, that money is being wasted for the taxpayer, and government's obviously got a responsibility around that. Okay, so that's some of the drivers. We also saw, I've pinched Ilka's slide here. I think it's a good one. I think this is about the use of technology, or rather, shall I say, the lack of use of technology in our sector. And this won't come to a surprise. We're kind of bottom of the table, the league table, not a good place to be at any time. This is actually from Accenture. I think this is a German report. But again, it's pretty standard around the world. Okay, so let's move it on. What we're trying to do here is bring digital together with construction. We're trying to merge these sectors. We're trying to fuse these skill sets. We're trying to go from, back in the UK, it was sort of 2010, we had glimmers of success, leading companies like Arab, HOK, and others that were doing really smart, innovative things. But that's not creating a whole sector improvement. That's not creating a whole sector improvement for taxpayers and for taxpayer money. So what we're trying to do by these initiatives around Europe is I think, all the same. We're trying to overlap these increasingly, these sectors, and from that derive efficiency, productivity, transparency, value for money growth. You could go on, and please do. Wow, we've got a lot going on. I think this is a really important moment in our sector for Europe. I thank the organisers for putting this event on at such a time. We can see from what we've got on the board here, and there are others as well that aren't on here. I can see Denmark, for example, is not on the list, and others. There is a real groundswell of recognition that BIM, call it digitalisation, call it open, whatever you want to call it, but it is growing as a force around Europe. Well, that's great, isn't it? Fine. Well, no, not exactly. And we had a glimpse of that this morning because we're starting to talk about our BIM, our way of doing it. This is our flavour of BIM. I'm going back to Ilka's dogs here. This is my vision of my dog. That isn't really going to help grow the market. What that will only do, it will confuse the market, it will confuse industry, it will add cost. We're trying to take cost away. So this fragmentation of principles and practices is actually going to harm us. So this is what I see, it's what we see, it's what we share as a vision in the EU BIM task group as something to address and something to avoid this divergence and fragmentation. We want to take a European approach, quite simply. We want to agree the principles and practices that we can do together. So this was one of our meetings last year as we were forming our group. We're comprised of public stakeholders and members of industry that have been nominated by the public sector to represent the public stakeholder viewpoint. So in here we have public procurers, estate owners, infrastructure owners, policymakers, and others as well that are helping to present the public stakeholder view. We've got 14 countries represented. And this is our vision. The focus is on saving money, becoming more efficient, more productive. This is not a charity. This is not a thing to do because BIM is an exciting prospect. This is about the sharp end, I would say, of policy as well. It's about the funding aspect that I talked about earlier, getting value for money. It's also about optimizing the whole life cycle of assets. We do so much focus on what is essentially somewhere between 10 and 20% of the overall cost of an asset, called the capital phase. We spend our lives focusing on that. And actually, of course, as I'm sure we all appreciate here, the broader amount of cost goes into the operation of that asset. We also want to be very explicit about this. We're doing this for the sector, with the sector. This is intended to be a collaboration between the public sector and private sector. We want to help grow opportunities. We want to find new ways of working that the private sector can exploit. And also to the international dimension, as we heard earlier, look for ways we can grow the international market. This is a list of member states that are involved in the group in some way already. We want to grow that group over the next period through our launch and so on. So what is it we're going to deliver as an EU BIM task group? What are we going to produce? Well, quite simply, we want to create a handbook for public procurers, for policymakers and estate owners that are looking to adopt BIM into their policy or procurement framework to do it in a aligned way. So we're going to set out a handbook. We are co-funded by the European Commission for 2 years, 2016-2017, to address these key questions. The why should public procurers consider adopting BIM? Why should they collaborate? Why should they align to a European way of doing it? What are the outcomes? What are the things that you should do? What are the common practices and principles? And also, how should you go about doing it? We've got 3 broad work streams that look at procurement issues, technical issues, and skills development issues. And we're going to look at the principles and practices across Europe to create a single way, to create an EU BIM way of working. So where are we now? We're on the start line. I'm not going to pretend we've got a lot of material to show. This is going to be a fairly short conclusion now because we actually have only just really started to do our work. We launch on the 29th of February in Brussels. We have there our planning sessions. We, in the steering committee with others, with the General Assembly, which is about 50 people from the 14 plus countries, will consider the plan, will develop the plan itself as to how we're going to produce our work and engage with industry as well. And we'll definitely want to inform you. Please do take a look at our website and get engaged. And with that, I would like to thank you for your time and invite you to join us on this collaboration to create a single EU BIM. Thank you.
Is there any questions anyone would like to ask from the floor? As long as you can speak in Scotland, it'll be okay. Maybe I'll ask a question then to 3. I mean, what do you see as the biggest challenge in countries and across Europe to making this a reality?
My turn on? Yeah. I think it's a great question. I think one view is a human thing, is a person thing, is that, and Ilka and I were talking about this earlier, is that it's in our nature sometimes to want to invent the wheel. We had, I think, Sergio's presentation where we were inventing the idea of inventing the wheel. I think one of the challenges we have is that we all feel that our wheel is the best. So I think we've got to sometimes share what we have, look at principles, and actually when we start doing that, so this is part of the challenge, but I'm going to give hopefully a positive view on this as well. I think part of the challenge is that we focus on our own things and see those as probably the right way to do it. But I think what we've seen, especially over the past year or so working together, is that we see when we start talking about the principles that underlie our thinking, often they're the same. We held a workshop, one of our very first ones that Mark and I ran, with Hill and Diderik, who's not here, from Norway. We found that using visual boards about what we're doing was a really useful way to unlock those common drivers and common principles. Yeah.
So here,
I agree with that. It's definitely it's the people side. Technology, yeah, we'll get there. It's not the problem, but it's really getting everyone involved and on the journey at the right pace, in the right time.
So you?
Yeah. The experience we have nowadays in France is the following. We're doing a lot of politics and not a lot of science
And technical issues. I mean, this is really frustrating because there's a lot of fear going on between, various stakeholders, who will benefit from this transition. And there will be definitely some kind of changes in the value chain. And some people would want to improve their positions and others will have, fears in losing some positions. So a lot of things going on there, and also a lot of discussions on the political level between ministries and all that. And that's basically a shame, I think. This is on the national level. On the European level, I think the big challenge will be to see exactly what can be done together between various countries and what is specific to each country. And we need to have this discussion, because whenever we can do things together, I mean, we will be more efficient. But some things are very specific. So this is a big discussion going on.
Okay. Any more? Or? Okay. Sorry.
I would like to talk. To ask about the legislation. Like, did you find like the current legislation that you have in your different countries? Do you have to change it, like, for implementing BIM? And when it comes to like the European common project, having different legislations in different countries, is it possible to come with together with a common BIM?
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a good question.
Thank you. One of the work groups that was launched in France was focused on these legal issues and legislations. And the first results were very positive, because it seems that nothing prevents using BIM in the current legislation. We don't have to change the legislation. We just need to define exactly how BIM will be integrated in the current legislation. So this is a big step forward. Then on the European level, I think there's maybe Adam can talk about that. There's this new directive in the European public procurement that will tend to make things coherent between various European countries. Maybe you want to.
Yeah, well, I just agree with Cyril. I think we've all got, at our national level, legal working groups to understand how to enable BIM, perhaps the way to unlock some of those barriers to adopt and get the most value from BIM around IP, for example, liability insurance and those things. But again, they're all common across Europe. On the public procurement side, that does give a general encouragement for the use of BIM, but it's non-specific about how you do that. So our project, if you like, our EU BIM task group, our EU BIM, is a way to give advice to public procurers that are looking at the procurement directive to say, well, here's a way that you could consider doing it. To your last question about how can we change legislation at a European level, because we've all got slightly different proprietary ways of doing things within country, ask us in about a year's time. We'll know where we are on that one. I think we're just at the beginning of that process to unlock what the issues are around IP, insurance, liability at a country level. So we haven't really got into some of that. But it's a good question, but maybe for a bit later on.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. Thank you.